Welcome to the Performance Enhancing Podcast. It's like steroids for your brain. A podcast for people looking to live life at their peak potential. Chock full of real-world tools and knowledge that you can apply in your life today. By providing you with a lens into the lives, beliefs, practices, and actions of those who are already living extraordinary lives, the Performance Enhancing Podcast will help you shift your mindset or create that change in your daily rituals and habits so you can explode with success in the areas of life that are most important to you. So get ready for another dose of Performance Enhancing Podcast with SatoriPrime. Here's your host, Ilan Ferdman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Pep Talk or Performance Enhancing Podcast with your host, Ilan Ferdman. Have an awesome two-part series here for you. And this is a topic that is hitting really close to home right now. And more parents that I speak to are having this very similar conversation, especially in my circles. And that's the topic of homeschool. Now, the guest today is Dan Louzonis, who you can look him up at Homeschool Dad. He works with one of my coaching clients. This is a very successful entrepreneur that was trying to figure out what to do with his children in the education world because, like myself and many others, has just seen that education, whether it's public or private, is deficient in giving kids the tools to survive in today's fast-paced world. And so he sought out Dan, who basically coaches executives, high-end entrepreneurial types, business people who are looking for other ways to structure homeschool, being a little more hands-off because they don't have time necessarily to do it. And I had an offline chat with him before inviting him to the interview and was just in awe. And I've implemented just two of the things that he told me on that initial conversation and already seen a massive shift in my children. So I invited him to come out here, and he was gracious enough to do so. And just an incredible insight into not only our educational system, but limiting beliefs of parents and what, in essence, the educational system is doing to our children. So Dan, in this part, we're going to cover how to create self-sustained children, which is his big thing. His focus is unlocking your kids' full potential, why the next tycoon will be a homeschooled student, and an incredible study that he's going to share with you guys about brain-damaged children, which was stunning. And then we end this one with TV and its effect on children and attention span and all sorts of things. And then dribbled in there is tips and tools on how to just get started. You don't have to go from 0 to 100, but there's little things that you can do, like you shared with me, that I've already done that have made a massive difference. So if you have the young kids or know anyone that has young kids, please share this with them. Even if they do a few of these things, I think it'll make a drastic difference in their children's lives. And as a parent, I know that we all only want the best for our children. So I was very happy with this interview, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode. So this is a first for me. We've never had a guest like this on here before, and I'm super excited. So first of all, Dan Louzonis, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ilan.
So, Dan, before I start grilling you, and I say that in a loving way because the topic is going to be very interesting for a lot of people. Tell people a little bit about your background and what you do, and then we'll kind of get into all the other stuff.
So I grew up in a working class family in Massachusetts, and by all conventional measures, I was a true success. I made it to an Ivy League college, and I graduated early from the University of Pennsylvania back in 1995. In fact, I got a terrific job right out of college, trading stock options in the beginning of the bull market, the tech boom of the late 90s, early 2000s. And I thought that I had it all figured out and that my life was going to basically be on cruise control from here out. I thought for sure that by the time I was 30, I'd be a millionaire And like I said, everything, the world would, lay down at its feet for me, at my feet. But
Welcome reality.
I woke up at 30 and I was a multi-thousandaire, and the industry that I was in basically evaporated. So, all my best laid plans, they were thrown out the window. And I realized there were a lot of flaws in my education and so on and so forth. And ultimately, I would have to reinvent myself if I was going to, become everything I thought I was going to be, at least financially. Because when I was young, my goals were all financial, and I have to admit that now. That's how I grew up, thinking that money was everything. Next thing you know, I'm married and I have kids. And it really hit home for me because I did not want my kids to wake up when they were 30 and feel like they'd only scratched the surface of their potential. I did not want them to wake up, late in life when it's very difficult to reinvent yourself and, there are mouths to feed and bills to pay, and feel like their options in life were limited. I wanted my kids to have, infinite options. And so this was kind of just brewing in the back of my mind. I didn't have any real plan or any real knowledge about how to raise kids. But one thing I started doing with my son when he was 3.5, and this is what basically led me to where I am now, is I started doing workbooks with him when he was 3.5. And we did them every single day. We did them on weekends. We did them in the summertime. And we just started crushing these workbooks. Before you know it, he was, doing 6th grade math, and he was just 5 years old. And I was really, excited about his progress. And, this was out of the blue. This wasn't in my, plan of making millions or anything like that. This was a whole new experience for me. And basically what I stumbled on was the power of individualized instruction. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was kind of just had my nose to the grindstone, and I had a stack of workbooks that we just went through one by one. It was an hour and a half a day, every single day. And like I said, by the time he was 5 years old, he was starting algebra, and he was still 9 months away from kindergarten.
Wow.
So what I did was I stumbled on, like I said, the power of individualized instruction, and it opened up so many doors, so many other avenues for where my life was going to go after that, because there was no way we were going to put him in a school. The local kindergarten wanted kids to be able to count to 10 by the end of the year. Who knows where he'd be by the end of that year, but he was, well past that. And the math was really just the tip of the iceberg. John was reading, and his verbal skills were up there. And like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, but now looking back, I realized that I stumbled upon, a formula for cultivating and unlocking genius in children.
Wow.
And so, like I said, it was just a start. We went from math and reading, and we branched out into chess, piano, and even computer programming, and you name it, we've done it. And that's how I came to be basically no longer a guy who trades the financial markets, but I came to be a guy who works with parents on how to unlock the potential in their own kids. And let me just say one more thing about that. My kids are so accelerated that I don't even have to spend any time with them. In other words, we just give them lists of things to do. We throw books at them. They're totally self-propelled, and they require very little oversight and effort from my wife and I. And because of that, I've been able to really launch this new career of mine where I offer the same expertise and the same services to other families that I use with my own children. Because everywhere I go, everyone who meets my kids wants to know, what did you do to get those kids to that level? And that, I don't know if that's a long answer to your question.
No, perfect. I have so many questions
here before you now, and not as someone teaching people how to trade stock options, but on how to unlock the full potential within children.
So many questions. Okay, so first, how old are your kids? So people get a sense.
So John is 11 and a half now, and Christine will be 10 very shortly.
Okay, great. And they've been homeschooled their entire lives, never set foot in school?
Never set foot in school, never set foot in any elementary school. And they also never set foot really in a preschool or a daycare.
Interesting. Okay. is there an intention at some point to send him to school, whether it's like high school or college or anything like that?
Well, my son is way past college, high school level work, so there's not a high school around that he could go to that wouldn't be easy for him in the sense of the material being easy. So he's way past high school. He took a test last year, and they measured his reading, and they said he should be in grade 13.5 with reading, which means he should be. I'm a math person, but I had to do the math on that. That he should be halfway through sophomore year, or at least that's what his confidence level.
At 11, he was 11.
Yeah, he was 10 when he took it. He should be halfway through sophomore year of college already. Yeah, I mean, he could go to Harvard and Yale, and he could definitely be challenged still. There's stuff out there that's above his head or over his head. However, we started out this journey with an eye towards academic acceleration. And since then, it's evolved to where we want to accelerate everything about our kids. And what that did was that pushed us towards a new goal of raising self-propelled, super animated, super precocious entrepreneurs. We want John to skip school because high school is really just prep for college, and college is just prep for
nothing.
Working for the man.
Exactly.
So college is outdated, and as is the whole system that feeds into it. I think what you've seen was all these college dropouts from Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Michael Dell. I think the next wave of ultra tech tycoons, ultra successful people will be the homeschool kids who have never even set foot.
Couldn't agree more. So let's put a few myths to bed here. One, someone might be thinking like, well, Dan is super smart. His wife is probably super smart, and they just had super smart genius babies. And, my kid is not that smart. So there's no way I can get results like that. So what would you say to someone that has that kind of?
Well, they would also say, I'm not that smart, and my wife is not that smart, and so on and so forth. I've heard it a bunch of times. I try to tell people I'm dumb, that I flunked my driver's test 3 times, that I've been hitting golf balls into the trees on the right for 25 years and can't figure it out. I do not consider myself a bright person at all. Well, on one hand, people are just looking for an excuse to say no.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, there's this genuine intellectual belief that success is a product of luck or DNA or circumstances.
Yes.
And, I couldn't disagree more. I'd try to get them to read Outliers if they were a reading person. Outliers for me was a very important book because it clarified a lot of things that I sort of knew in my head. Just for the listeners out there, Outliers is an attempt at empirically proving that success is simply a matter of hard work.
Yeah.
And that luck has nothing to do with it. Bill Gates is not significantly smarter than anybody else. Or, to look at it another way, there are plenty of people as smart as Bill Gates who haven't enjoyed the same success he has because he outworked them. And I have plenty of personal anecdotes, and I think most people out there do, success stories where people came from nothing, they defied odds, and you have stutterers who have become world-famous on the stage speakers. You have people with learning disabilities, dyslexics who are running multi-billion-dollar companies. They're just the examples are if you want to be blind to them, you can be blind to them. But in my experience, most people when they start resisting me, it really says more about them and
their limiting beliefs.
Their own limiting beliefs, which ironically have been induced through 20 years of schooling. 20 years of obedience-based education. And people who lack confidence generally lack confidence because they've never done anything for themselves in their entire lives. So many people, want to point to the degree that they earned from a school and say, look, I'm successful. And the reason they do that is because they haven't done anything else.
Yeah, very true.
They're had on, superficial measures of achievement. And, look, I sympathize. I know how it is. I know what failure is like, and I know how easy it is to discount the success of other people. and to wallow in our own self-pity. And, I don't want my kids to grow up with that limiting belief at all. So that's just yet another of the 9 million reasons that we raise our kids outside the system, and hopefully with a whole other set of brainwashing.
I want you to share a story with me when we had spoken previously, and I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy that was taking kids who were deemed basically like, I don't know what the right word is.
They were brain damaged kids.
Yeah, brain damaged kids, and share that story.
So there's a guy in Philadelphia, he's passed now, but his foundation lives on. His name is Glenn Doman, and he used to work with children who were brain damaged. And he had them do all sorts of cognitive drills to try to heal their brain. Some of these kids had a whole part of their brain missing, or a whole part of their brain that seemed like it was irreparably damaged. And he had them doing things, ambidextrous, physical things, intellectual things, to try to basically stimulate new neural pathways in their brain. And what he was discovering was some of these kids flipped from being sort of mentally retarded into being ingenious just through therapeutic attacks on their brains. And so he stumbled upon basically this idea that the brain can rewire itself, and additionally that young children's brains are incredibly plastic, and basically they are blank slates and they can do anything. They can be hardwired to learn. He has examples of kids he's worked with who've learned like 6 or 7 different languages by age 5, doing all sorts of ingenious things, because again, these kids' brains are actually very potent. The human brain is growing at an exponential rate from conception to age 6. If you think about going from a 1 or 2-celled organism, up to what it can do, these are actually momentous or monumental, achievements. And so he's this guy. You can Google him. You can find his books. He's got plenty of books out there. He never really became ultra mainstream. He's more of a cult following, and he's best known for encouraging parents to teach their kids to read at a young age with flashcards, which most of us assume that kids are not intelligent. They can't learn. They can't read. They definitely can't do math at that young age. And, he has all sorts of proof that it is possible. And when you read his book, the first 50 pages of his book, I tell everybody to read it. How to Teach Your Baby to Read.
How to Teach Your Baby to Read?
Yeah. When you read that, you will look at children in a whole other light. And these are things that I didn't know at all when I was working with my kids and doing workbooks with them. But they make complete sense, because I don't think my kids are born smart. I think that I have a stack of workbooks, and I have the pictures, the stack of workbooks, yay high, that we did every single day. And we counted all the time. We went over our phonics all the time. We read all the time. And we put them in an ultra stimulating environment. And basically all the results that I got, they dovetailed and they corroborated, or were corroborated by everything in his books that I read, subsequent to doing what I was doing. And so, one of the analogies I use is that, somebody is having health problems and they start stretching a little bit, and they start stretching a lot, and they're getting good feedback, and they're saying, hey, this whole stretching thing, this is really good for the body, and it can be, a transformational thing for our health. And then they discover that yoga is 4,000 years old. That's kind of how I was. I didn't know that there was already research out there that children should be pushed a little bit when they're young. And there was already research out there on the power of individualized instruction. These are things that I just didn't know. When I first heard of the word homeschooling, I was 30 years old. I'd never even heard of the expression.
Wow.
And my first reaction to it was, or the first image that was conjured up in my mind was sitting around the table with the makeshift chalkboard and mom lecturing, because that's what I thought education was. And so the first time I heard of it, I thought it was crazy as well. And most people in the northeastern part of America still think it's crazy. It's nothing that's on television. It goes against everything that we were taught as children. And it's really kind of exploded in other parts of the country. And it's really mainstream. in everywhere in America except the Northeast. And that's for a variety of reasons, one of which is inertia. But there's no stopping this movement because the individualized instruction is just, it's like gravity. You can't argue with its power. It's just there, and it's not going away. And there are people like me out there who are waking up at 30 and they're realizing that we were sold a bill of goods. Well, I'm past 30 now, but they're waking up sooner and sooner to the idea that school is a bill of goods. Yesterday, I was in New York City walking around Washington Square, and NYU has its graduation going on this week, and there were tons of kids with their purple graduation gowns on, and I had to tell my kids that NYU is the most expensive school in the country. All in, room and board, it's $70,000 a year.
A year, yep.
So you're talking $280,000 for an undergraduate degree there. Hopefully, your kid doesn't major in something like psychology with a minor in French. Hopefully, they get something that they can get a job with. But college is very expensive in terms of money, very expensive in terms of time. And on top of all that, it's expensive in terms of lost opportunity.
Yeah.
What you could do on your own, learning to be self-propelled, learning these skills that everyone at some point is going to have to try to learn. We don't live in very boring economy anymore. This is a globally competitive, super dynamic economy.
Yeah.
We have to invent ourselves not just every couple of years, but almost every couple of months. And we need to raise children who are risk takers, who are open-minded, who are flexible, who have a variety of skill sets, none of which are covered
delivered at school. Yeah.
In the Common Core.
Let me ask you this. So I'm a huge believer in that. And I think a lot of people that become entrepreneurs later in life, like yourself, who had a structured job and then went to kind of a more entrepreneurial path, we all have to make that switch. And I've said to people, they're like, what do you want to teach your kids the most? And I like the word that you use, self-propelled. But I just think if you can instill in a child the desire to master, the desire to learn, you've done your job. Because it doesn't matter. I don't care what they do. Like whether that starts with piano and they learn that skill and then it can impact it in other areas of their life. I think for me, and I have a 4.5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So, I think every parent kind of does the best that we know to do, right? But at this age, there's a lot of play, there's a lot of toys, there's a lot of just running around outside. And you're talking about sitting a 3.5-year-old down to do an hour and a half workbook per day. And
Right.
My brain's going, and I'm sure other listeners are going like, there is no effing way that my kid is going to sit down and want to do a workbook when they can play with their, I don't know, puzzle, Lego, dolls, watch TV, like any of that stuff. So how did you make that switch so that your son was actually excited to do this work?
Well, I never said he was excited. My kids would eat ice cream if it was up to them, and they would never go to the dentist either. It's up to us to be the adults and to, we're responsible for our kids' education, whether we send them to school or not.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people tell me, I can never do what you do. It's too big of a responsibility, as if their educational plan somehow absolves them of responsibility, which is, it doesn't even deserve a minute of discussion, quite honestly. How do you get that kid to sit down? Well, whatever their attention span is, say it's 10 minutes, you do 10 minutes. Next day, you do 12 minutes. You just build it up. Additionally, you remove the things that kill attention span, and that would be the electronic devices. And one thing I haven't talked about yet is television. Television, to me, is basic. It's basically taken, a big bite out of my own life. And it's probably the main culprit in destroying like my whole generation. Cable TV came out in maybe the early 80s, and it seemed awesome. We could watch, HBO, which was a new thing. We couldn't do that before. We didn't even have VCRs at the time. So the fact that we could watch a movie was a big deal. And nobody really thought much of it. They thought it was technological progress. How harmful could TV be? Next thing you know, there's thousands of channels, and people have forfeited, and I'll use the word forfeit, significant portions of their life in front of televisions. I mean, if aliens wanted to infiltrate, the human race, or they wanted to conquer us, they could just, send down a television, because there hasn't been any device that's been better engineered to, let's say, destroy minds, body, and soul all at once. And the TV in the early 80s was the iPhone and Minecraft of today.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's harmless. It seems like it's got many good uses. Everybody else is doing it. But my biggest recommendation for anyone with any kids is to do zero television. And I get more pushback on that.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about why I get pushback on that than almost anything. And the reason we get pushback on that is because mom and dad watch TV. They like their TV shows. And not only that, they have watched TV for a significant portion of their lives as well. And if TV is bad for their children, that means it's bad for them. Now you're starting to kind of tickle, the adult insecurity, the adult sense of failure. And nobody wants to think they've wasted a massive portion of their life at anything. It's just, it's very hard to deal with that. Now, I think that's one of the key differences between me and other people, is that I rip myself to shreds. And I understand that if I hadn't been watching TV, that I could have, if I had used that time productively, I could have learned how to play every instrument in a symphony orchestra. I mean, there's so many things that I could have done. Maybe I would have started a business. Maybe I would have went deeper into X, Y, and Z. So it's a personal thing for me, and it's a personal thing for me. And I do not want to repeat the same mistakes with my kids. That I might make different mistakes, but I definitely don't want to repeat the ones that I made. Now, about limiting television, because everyone says, well, we limit television. Well, my mother limited television too. Everyone else watched way more television than I did. Somehow I still managed to watch probably 25, 30,000 hours of TV in my life, even though it was strictly limited. Everyone says I limit my kid with the video games. I limit my kids with this. You really can't limit it. And once I was 18, once I was on my own, I didn't have a reading hobby. I wasn't reading books, so I watched television. I didn't have, things that replaced the TV, so their TV, kind of consumed my in-between time, which is something I love to talk about. The in-between time where I could be reading, or I could be learning to juggle, learning to play the piano. TV it takes over everything.
Yep.
The same way that the cell phone is now with everybody else. And so the TV, I got so much pushback on the TV, but the TV is an impediment in so many different ways. I talked about attention span for a second. Kids will not have any attention span if they watch TV. They will not be able to entertain themselves. They will not be comfortable directing their own thoughts. It's unbelievable. In fact, when I work with, because it kills their attention span, it drives them away from books. Bibliophilia is a huge part of my curriculum for not just my kids, but my clients' kids. And no kids will read books if they have the option of watching a movie, playing a video game. They just won't.
Now, what happens with, I'm just thinking I didn't have a lot of snacks in my house, for example, but then I went to a friend's house and he had that pantry full of, cookies and M&Ms and all this stuff. And I was still okay. But, there's certain kids that when you restrict things in your home, they'll go to someone else's home and they'll binge on that thing.
Right. Well, my kids, I tell them, you're not allowed to eat that stuff. And you could do the same thing. And your mother could have done the same thing to you. And you would maybe test her. Maybe you would eat that Twinkie at your friend's house right before dinner. And she has the option of basically telling you you're not going over there ever again if you don't listen to me, or letting it just slide. And we let lots of things slide in our relationships with our kids, our spouses, whatever. It's just a question of, what are you going to let slide? If parents can't get their kids to listen to them, the problems multiply, and they multiply, exponentially. What are they going to be? If your 5-year-old won't listen to you, what are they going to do when they're 15 and 16 years old? And you say, don't drink beer, don't smoke pot, and definitely don't get in the car we ever do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, education is so intertwined with parenting, and it's so intertwined with our own identities. There's just no getting around that. Now, getting back to the TV for a second, you know, when I look back on what I did when I was accelerating my kids by the seat of my pants, I didn't understand how powerful that television thing was. And my kids did watch a little TV when they were very young. And instantly, right after I turned the TV off, they didn't want to do the workbooks. They didn't want to listen to me. I could see it instantly. And I think every parent sees it as well. And what I did was I experimented with just cutting it out. And
how? Did you remove the TVs? Did you remove cable?
Well, right now we don't really have a television. My kids
in the household.
There's one in the guest room, but you definitely don't want one in the center of your living room.
Got it.
I tell parents if they watch, I don't care if they watch TV, but they should watch when the kids are in bed. Probably they should watch it on a bedroom TV. I only care about kids. You know, it's too late for a lot of us out there. And, you know, but the TV thing, I look back on what I did with my kids, and the real glue was zero television and zero preschool and zero daycare. And my kids, because they had the workbooks and because they had a lot of adult conversation, which is really the reason we don't, you know, daycare and preschool don't accelerate kids, because they don't hear adult conversation directed at them.
Yeah.
Because there's no television crowding out conversation in the family, they go deep into like little hobbies. And one thing I did want to talk about, when you said earlier that most parents don't think they can get their kid to sit down for an hour, you definitely just start small. And you know that's also a limiting belief as well. But you definitely start small. But there are 14 hours in a day. And I don't care if it's Saturday. I don't care if it's a holiday. There's 14 hours in a day. The kids could do work for 3 full hours. They could do, you know, on like a light day here, they would do piano, chess, and guitar and math. And they still have 11 hours of free time.
And what do they do in that free time?
Well, my son, you know, they do, it's not totally free when I'm around, but if kids are not watching TV and not playing video games, anything else they do is very positive. If they're doing pretend play or playing with Legos, my son is really into solving the Rubik's Cube. He's into computer programming. He has his own podcast. Anything that they do, my daughter likes to write stories. If you just take away these big negatives, which are basically TV and video games, they will figure stuff out. Kids survive for thousands of years without, you know, a device. And it's unbelievable how many parents think they can't survive without a television or without giving their kid the iPad. Or what I saw this morning, the stroller with the iPad latch on the front of it. The kid is strapped in, and they still have to be watching. They're getting strolled outside, and they still need to be watching something.
Wow.
I mean, from my perspective, that is child abuse.
All right, so we'll end it right there. Yeah, TV, kind of a crazy concept. I mentioned earlier that I did actually implement a couple of these things. The 2 things that I did implement are no screen time and these workbooks. Interestingly enough, screen time in our house, although not overpowering, I mean, there wasn't an incredible amount of TV that my kids were watching. I did notice that every time they would watch TV or want to watch TV and I said no, there'd be a huge tantrum and all this stuff would happen. When we cut these TVs out, now if they want TV in the morning or if they want TV after dinner or whatever it is, which was kind of usual times that they would watch, and I say no, there's really no argument. I could just say, my son this morning asked me, Abba, can we watch TV? And I said no, and he said, why? I said, because I want to talk to you. And he's like, okay, and that was it. So I thought it was going to be much harder, put it that way, than it actually was. I've also seen since time that my kids are doing projects, playing, imagination from what I've seen has gone through the roof. They're creating games, they're playing with each other. It's been massive. And that's, you know, we've only been doing this for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe. So yeah, highly encourage you to do this. The workbooks, the Kumon books, which he'll talk about in part 2, I highly recommend as well. I think kids just love spending time with their parents, and if you're going to spend an hour and a half with them doing
Did you read my eyes and my aching thoughts? Did you walk through walls till you had to grow? Oh my God, your smile and my soundless calls. Did the light leave home where the sea